AI is the first invention that goes beyond being a tool. You have to come to think of it as another species that we've invented. I believe that, in a sense, human evolution is over, that the future of this species will be by design, not by natural selection. Humans have invented the most powerful technology in our history, and in the end, it'll change everything about everything. I'm Craig Mundie. I spent many years working at Microsoft. A lot of the work that was done there was in artificial intelligence, and since my retirement there, I've been coaching other CEOs on various issues around strategy and policy. Personally, I think the shortest term risks are actually things that the AI will enable at the hand of a bad actor. So humans are much more likely to use it to create problems for other humans than the machine is likely to create human problems by itself. Now, as the machines get super intelligent and have more and more agency and can manipulate things in the physical world directly, then you can say, well, it might decide to go rogue by itself. And indeed, I think that's hypothetically possible. But a lot of focus is being applied to this problem of trying to keep the machine on a good path. And the reason I'm optimistic about that is this thing is going to be a new intelligent species. So there's good news and there's bad news. The bad news is, as it gets smarter, maybe smarter than humans, and has agency, it could potentially do things that are not good for us. The good news is it didn't arrive on a spaceship. We sort of know everything about these things. We're building them. So we're in a period of time where we have an opportunity to imbue human values in the machines that we're building. And that hasn't really become a focus yet because we're just learning how to build them at all. AI is the first invention that goes beyond being a tool. The computers we've had since the 1940s until the present have become more and more powerful in their ability to compute. But what they do was created by a clever programmer writing specific instructions to the machine. Back at the beginning of Microsoft, for example, or the personal computing era, we recognized, wow, it would be really neat if a lot more people could get benefit from computers without having to write programs. And so some clever people wrote programs that created programs that allowed people to make computers do things without writing programs. Two classic examples were word processors and spreadsheets. Billions of people today write documents and do spreadsheet computing without ever writing a line of code. How do we get to AI? People write one really, really clever program, and the only thing that program does is it makes the machine learn. You could think of it as we wrote the last program. The last program of the last era was one that just said learn. So today the AI only understands the world through the artifacts that humans have created, pictures, words, descriptions, but it doesn't feel it. That will change, when we take sensors and robotics and we couple it to the AI will gain agency and the ability to operate in the physical world directly. That may bring a level of deeper understanding about the world so that when it starts to answer a question, it's not trying to answer it in the context where it's learned about the world as an abstract thing, but has learned about the world as a physical thing. The models are now also advancing into the ability to do multiple step reasoning. And from that, it can actually make new insights by taking things that were otherwise separate pieces and realizing if you combine them, you might get an interesting new answer. This machine will be intelligent in its own right. It'll have agency at the end of the day. And particularly when it's paired with sensors and robotics, we'll be able to operate autonomously in the world. It's like, some smart new partner arrived here, and we have to figure out how do we coexist with it. Dream the biggest dream that you can project from what we are currently doing, and then say, okay, if 3 years from now, let's say maybe by 2030, all the things improve by 20x. It happens 20 times faster. What that means is that everything that humans would have done between here and the end of the century will be done by 2035. I think it's natural for people to be concerned. Most people's reaction then is to say, okay, what happens to me? What happens to my kids? These things are not yet perfect. Maybe they'll never be perfect, but neither are humans. I think the most immediate changes that will come in the next 5 years certainly will be in healthcare. One of the great advantages of artificial intelligence will be its ability to do something humans can't do, which is to ingest all the information, in a sense, into a single brain and be able to reason across all of it. I would love today to be able to design out the bugs in my personal body, all right? But today, our command of our physiology is not sufficient to allow us to do that. We struggle to make single molecule drugs to fix, specific problems or fight the common cold or, deal with diabetes, other broad diseases, Alzheimer's and dementia. It's such a complex area. Humans have essentially had to break it up into narrower and narrower fields in order for any one human to be a master of that little piece. But human physiology is one big integrated system. So to some extent, the human constraints are forcing us to look at you in tiny little pieces when your overall health condition requires it to be reintegrated. So the gift of these machines is the ability to integrate across all of it. So when you ask it a question, you don't have to ask the same question to 10 specialists and hope that somehow you can combine it all together. The machine does that for you. I think broadly, scientific discovery is going to be accelerated, certainly within these next 5 years. This includes new areas in material science and chemistry capabilities. But once you start to give humans a new palette from which to paint, which is custom materials, custom chemical processes that didn't get formed in nature, then all the things that we do can be redone in some interesting way. I'm an optimist, and there are many such people on the planet. They're the ones who create the technology, that create the products, that create the change in our society. And they're going to change it again. The greatest engine of that change will be the emergence of these super intelligent machines. I think that the whole concept of education as we know it today and practice it today will ultimately be displaced. We have scalable teachers. We can have as many teachers as we want now because the AI will be the teacher. Therefore, we should return to a somewhat Socratic method of teaching. I've got one tutor. They're with me all the time. They can teach me anything in any field on any day. The rate at which I progress is limited only by my interest, curiosity, and capacity, and not by anything else. This will represent a wholesale change in our society in the way that we think about how we raise kids, how we educate them, and what they're capable of doing. If you look at the children today, that they're early adopters of the AI, and that many are finding it such a natural, and comfortable interaction that they prefer and are naturally starting to learn and explore things that they never see in school. The form of the AI that the kids have the most ready access to is the Chat GPT-like interfaces. Over time, we'll begin to put interfaces on these things that are specifically designed to facilitate education. And so while the parents, and our elders may have a difficult time imagining what that would be like, Personally, I don't think the kids will have a tough time adapting to it at all. The question is, when and how are we willing to actually alter some of these basic elements of our societies in order to move to this new model? If I could create a new curriculum in college, it would be a liberal education in technology. Now, if you look at the world today, these two things are almost perfectly bifurcated. We either give you a liberal arts education, which is supposedly one that, gives you the ability to think and reason, but you don't have any special technical skills. Or we put you in the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, math, and say, focus on one of these things. But the world we're entering is one where you'll need to adapt quickly to new capabilities, but these things will increasingly be rooted in deep technological capability. My own view is that somehow we need to alter the way that we train people. I'm hopeful that we're going to start to see some movement toward a revision of how we teach our kids. I think that the resistance from the incumbent education system is going to be extreme, and that is something that I worry about. I think that many types of work, will be fundamentally adjusted over time by the emergence of the combination of artificial intelligence and robotics. The robotics capabilities are now starting to attain not just superhuman strength in terms of physical capabilities, but the same dexterity that has often distinguished humans from machines in the past. So yes, more and more types of human work are going to be able to be at least augmented, if not ultimately displaced by this combination. We have to think differently about how we value ourselves and what we do. Today, and for all of time, a huge part of people's dignity attached to their work. From the beginning of time, we had to work to survive. What we're looking at is a future where what we had to work to do to survive may be substantially different or less. We've never had a society like that before. We see most societies, with stratification of capability or income levels. And we see good and bad associated with all of those. So it's clear to me that these things are going to change and that the AI will be a significant driver in creating that change. In the U.S., for decades, we have started to see how technologies alter our democratic institutions. AI is not the first to have an effect. Arguably it's the fourth or fifth to have a real effect. The AI provides a new tool to provide information and, unfortunately, misinformation. Propaganda as an idea is not new, whether it's in elections or even in non-democratic countries. AI is just the greatest propaganda generator, and social media and the internet have become an unlimited store in which to distribute your messages. So this is creating fragmentation in the election process and a lot of confusion. And then, of course, if this stuff is fake, which the AI is the best yet at producing fake media, then people start to lose faith in what they even see. And, the fact that all this has been done in an open environment results in people who aren't even in our countries deciding to meddle in our politics, not by just their actions broadly, but by specific interventions intended to distort our politics. And, in a sense, society hasn't really adjusted yet to that, despite the obvious implications on our democratic processes. The whole world has essentially benefited from the adoption of these technologies, but we've had limited willingness, I'll say, on the part of the politicians to essentially constrain the use of these things in that process, because to some extent it serves their cause too. So this is not strictly the bad guys doing this to the good guys. It's viewed as a tool within our societies, for fighting with each other for political gain. These are just the dilemmas of dual use. And AI will be the world's broadest dual use capability. And so it'll be applied in politics and science and engineering and healthcare and every other field. And we're going to have to feel our way along and decide, when is enough enough? And then how do we make adjustments? A lot of my own work has been to focus on this question of how do you govern these machines. And the conclusion that I've come to is that in the end, there's no way to govern these machines other than by an AI. When I was appointed by Obama to the NSTAC, it was at the earliest days of the cybersecurity issues. Much of that was started at Microsoft by Bill Gates and me around the year 2000. After my retirement, about 6 years ago, I was introduced to Sam Altman at OpenAI. And through those introductions and my ongoing work with Sam, I became very familiar with the AI as we now see it in the marketplace today. I don't think that the quest has to be to try to create a uniform moral and ethical or even legal code for the whole human species. We didn't do that for ourselves yet. And if the machine is going to be comfortably adapted to work within our collective societies, then it's going to have to be a bit chameleon-like. It's going to have to be able to follow a certain set of rules in one place, and a different set of rules in another place. Today, you can send letters around the world. You can make phone calls around the world. You can fly airplane flights around the world. None of those things started that way. They all started with individual implementations in each country. And then they realized, wow, there's real value in bringing these things into alignment, to creating standard ways to do that. I think that has to become the new mission, of the governments. And if you look back to the Cold War era, we found that nuclear weapons were invented simultaneously and perfected, at least in the Soviet Union and the United States. And it's important to understand, back in those days, the two countries each developed the capability to blow up the planet several times over before they ever had the first conversation about controls. And eventually, the Americans and the Soviets realized that they had new risks that came from rapid dissemination of nuclear capabilities, and that was a greater risk to them than the idea that they were going to shoot at each other. And so we created the strategic arms limitation mechanisms. We created a non-proliferation regime. And here we are 70-some years later, and we've not seen another nuclear weapon fired. And so the question is, what will happen in the AI area? Today, the focus among militaries, for example, is to think it provides an advantage. But is that in some ways any different than nuclear weapons were then? Personally, I think it's not different. The AI represents an empowering technology, but it empowers bad guys just as it empowers good guys. You have an old problem and a new problem. The old problem is you have new technology in the hands of bad actors, and you have to worry about what they're going to do with it. You now have a new problem. As the AI gets smarter and has more agency, it could by itself decide to do things that aren't good for people. The question in my mind is, do the governments each decide to find their own solution to this problem? Or do they ultimately get together and realize, if we had a solution that tended to work in one country but didn't force every country into one exactly identical model of control, would that be a better solution? Personally, I think it would be. What I think in the long term, I don't think that there will be a single AI. What I think has to happen is there has to be a single architecture by which we govern all the AIs. So that thing is not essentially dictating what life will be like. It's trying to make sure that the actions taken by the AIs themselves and at the hand of all the humans tries to provide the level of comfort that people want based on the societal choices they've made. Over the next 5 years, I think we will see an acceleration of the role of artificial intelligence in warfare. On the downside, the thing I worry about the most is cyber war. We've already seen, even in the earliest days, in things like the war in Ukraine, but also even more recently in Gaza, that AI is rapidly being deployed to alter the model of kinetic warfare too. Intelligent and autonomous, drones and weapon systems, are already emerging. And I think that's inevitable. Nuclear war, synthetic biology producing things where bad actors decide to, the ultimate terrorist act is just, wipe out all humans. These things are possible today without an AI. They only get more possible with an AI. For me, these things accelerate the need to have some agreements among parties as to how we want to constrain their use in these battlefield kind of scenarios. That process is nascent at best now. So, if there's a risk, it comes from the fact that the deployment will be accelerating, but we are probably in one of the more difficult geopolitical periods in our contemporary world history. And that's unfortunate because it comes at a time where the greatest technological change in human history is emergent. My view is we have to realize we have agency. Partly we have that agency because we're inventing this thing. We have to decide while we're inventing it, how do we want to address these problems? We didn't make a decision early on that we were going to contain it. Why didn't that happen? Because in this case, this very powerful technology came from the private sector. Perhaps because people didn't recognize its potential or think through what the implications are, we didn't start to create ground rules for its deployment and dissemination at the same time that it was emerging. That may have been impossible because while the field of study's been around for 70 years, the emergence of products appeared to happen almost overnight. But it leaves us with this dilemma that how do we want to constrain this, given that it's a dual-use technology? And so I think, the world is going to have to ultimately be subdivided into those who agree that they want to live within a certain set of controlled trust, mechanisms, and those who don't. We have to make some choices about these things, and we need to do that fairly quickly. Most of the conversations are around the terminology that people have used is safety and alignment. They want these things to be safe, and then they want them to be aligned with human values. The problem is that they haven't yet agreed on a way to decide, well, what values, whose values? And if they're not all uniform, well, what happens then? These are the things that lead me to believe that the only thing that can make sense of this high-dimensional problem is another AI. And my own work is to focus on how can the AI be trained to understand these questions. The big concern for me is the speed at which this is happening. If you say, hey, I'll figure it out, but it's another 10 or 15 years worth of research, that's going to be a problem. So I'm much more inclined, as we have with other technologies, is to start to work with it and make adjustments to it and try to make the cycle of adjustment as rapid as possible. Humans as a species have got to decide, what do we want to be when we grow up? Many of the questions that I get start with the assumption almost that we're now a victim of our own success, that we've invented these AIs, and now what happens to me? And it's actually rare to find somebody that asks a different question, which is, well, now that we have this capability, how should we be changing ourselves, to be best suited to operate in this new world? Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk are perfect examples of people who think that humans should become a spacefaring species and that we should ultimately have as many people off the planet as on the planet. Well, if they're off the planet, then the borders we have here don't make that much difference to them. And AI may accelerate our engineering capabilities and our scientific discovery capabilities to make these things real much sooner than people would have expected. I believe that, in a sense, human evolution is over, that the future of this species will be by design, not by natural selection. And if you can design changes, I think we will. And I think the first changes will come by saying, let's design out the stuff we don't like about ourselves. Then it becomes irresistible to say, well, then what about enhancing the things that we do like about ourselves? This is essentially a completely different way of thinking about the relationship between the AI and the human. It's not like, oh, we created this thing and we're just stuck over here. We only have to be stuck here if we choose to be stuck here. And so it's not really, in my mind, a future battle between the super intelligent, agentic machine and poor old humans. At the highest level, there's only three possible outcomes. Outcome number one says, hey, one of these things is so clearly superior to the other after these adjustments that it just says there's not much value in that other thing. I don't care about it. This is the thing that has scared people, and people's ideas about this come from science fiction and entertainment and dramatic movies, but it's clearly a real risk. The second possible outcome is long-term symbiotic, coevolution, and where they're happy to coexist there. And whether each is getting something important from the other or not, is to be determined, but at least there's no conflict. You're not competing for resources. If we're in a world of abundance, it's not like we're fighting for air, land, water, or other things that have often led to conflict within the human world or between humans and less intelligent species on the planet. So we don't know what that looks like. The third possible outcome is hybridization. That you decide, wow, there's some good things about those humans and there's some good things about these machines. And, maybe 1 + 1 is equal to 5, all right? That we should figure out how you add them together. What that leaves open is the question of, well, if you were designing the future hybrid, what would you take from the human and what would you take from the machine? Where we fall in the probabilities of these outcomes, in my mind, is kind of a function of what humans decide to do during the coexistence period. If we just sit here and we get lazy and say, wow, man, it's great, these machines are just doing everything for us, we just get to go to the beach every day, then maybe that's all there is. But then as this thing evolves farther and farther beyond us, does it think its only job is to make us happy and sit on the beach all the time? Or they say, hey, why am I doing this? I can go on my own path. And so I want humans to kind of rise up and take advantage of the capability that we're creating, not just think that we're either victims of its emergence, we're condemned to be a lesser capable species simply because we do nothing. There are a lot of very clever people who are focused on these questions. It is products that get built and sold on a global basis that ultimately change society for better or for worse. The technologies are oftentimes neutral. It's what people do with them that makes the difference. Whether the AI becomes your shield or your demise is today in the hands of the humans. It'll never be perfect, but I'm very optimistic about where we'll end up.